You know, actually, the Paul Manafort trial is a perfect example. One of the things that is in this anti-corruption bill is that foreign governments should not be able to hire American lobbyists to lobby Washington on their behalf. That, you know, there are just like some really poisonous things we can say, we're just not going to do that. If foreign governments want to influence Washington, let them use their diplomatic corps. That's what it's there for. But it's one more example of how money rules Washington. Money shouts in Washington, money screeches in Washington, money commands in Washington. And what this bill is about is to say, we've talked for a long time about campaign contributions, and boy, that's important. I'm strong on making changes there. I'd like to see Citizens United overturned, but it's so much more. The influence of money in this town is huge, so that we now have a government that works really well for the wealthy and the well-connected, but it's not working for the people. So that's what all of these reforms that I've put together are all about.
So let's get to some of the specifics
Sure.
here. You're proposing a lifetime ban on lobbying for members of Congress, also for cabinet secretaries. You say you want to padlock the revolving door.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes the revolving door, does it get us some of the best and the brightest from the business world and from Wall Street? And if you shut that path down, do you worry that it could make it too costly for business leaders to become public servants?
Look, the problem we've got right now is that the revolving door means that when people take a stint in government, no one can know whether they're really working on behalf of the public interest or they're working on behalf of themselves. Look at what happened with Gary Cohn. So there's Gary Cohn. He's on his way out the door to go become Donald Trump's top economic advisor to push through a tax bill. That's his principal job. I mean, he said so. So what does he get on the way out the door from Goldman Sachs? $250 million gift. Think about that. And then he goes and pushes through a tax bill that helps whom? Oh, well, Goldman Sachs has more than $250 million in savings on their taxes in the first quarter. You know, that's a great return on investment for Goldman Sachs, but for the American people who are actually paying Gary Cohn's salary, it is not such a great return on investment.
Now, Gary Cohn did work for Goldman Sachs for many years, and so you can understand that he had a lot of his own blood, sweat, and tears, whether, you know, we can compare that to the average worker's blood, sweat, and tears in there, but he did work hard for that. What should Gary Cohn do under your plan if he does want to go and work for an administration? How do we get people that we think could be helpful to government to come?
Well, how about right off the top, we don't let folks like Goldman Sachs do a pre-bribe. So, for example, if Goldman Sachs had said to Gary Cohn and everybody similarly situated, look, you want to go and teach in a rural school, we'll make this $250 million available to you. You want to go and join the Peace Corps and help people around the world, we'll make this $250 million available to you. But that's not what they said. They said, you go to this one job where you will be in a position to write tax laws that will profoundly affect us, oh, and by the way, everybody else in the country, and for that, here's $250 million, I hope we're all still friends. No, that's just not right. So, if, right off the top, if somebody wants to go into public service, then they gotta wanna go. It's not because they got money from their employer to go take that job. That's not right.
Individual stocks. This has been getting a lot of headlines today, proposing that members of Congress don't hold any individual securities. And a lot of people have been pulling this out for their headlines, which I find kind of fascinating because we talk so much about the move into indexing. But people are kind of like, this is some affront that members of Congress couldn't hold individual stocks. So talk to us about why you think this is necessary and what it would do.
So once again, I just don't think the public ever ought to have to wonder that, when you vote on this bill, when you advance this bill, are you actually advancing the stocks that are in your portfolio, or are you working on behalf of the public? My view on this one is, We all understand how index stocks work. Just put your money in an index fund. Just put it there. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't take a job in the public interest.
Senator, last week we had President Trump coming out talking about changing the earnings system. Instead of having quarterly earnings, asking the SEC to study, maybe doing them every 6 months. And I'm curious because you talk a lot about transparency and also a lot about how you don't like short-termism in companies. Do you think that changing the earnings system is a good idea? Would that be something that you could get behind?
You know, what he's basically saying is let's give less information to investors, and somehow that's going to fix the short-termism problem. I just don't think that's the way we're going to fix the problem. And this is why I was out last week with my accountable capitalism bill. What that one says effectively is that we need to change the corporate charters for the largest companies in the country. And what we need to do is go back to what had basically been the rules for decades, going back for centuries. And that was the acknowledgement that corporations serve multiple stakeholders: employees, communities, customers, and shareholders. In fact, if you go back and read the Business Roundtable's statement from the early 1980s, they describe corporate responsibility exactly that way. Then you watch them by the late 1990s, you see the shift. And basically what the Business Roundtable, as you know, representing the biggest corporations in this country, effectively says is it's the job of corporations to shovel as much money as possible directly into the pockets of their shareholders, that is their sole job. And the problem is, just think about it from the point of view, say, of a CEO who's got $100 million to invest. CEO could say, we'll put that $100 million in a factory. It'll pay off in 5 years, 10 years, expenses up front, but it's going to pay off at some point down the line. That would be a long-term look. Or the CEO could say, you know, I could do a stock buyback right now. And with that stock buyback, we'll see the share value jump. And since I'm now heavily into shares, and that's a big part of how I get my compensation, they just go for the share piece of it. So what I propose in this bill is that executives, corporate executives who get these shares have to hold on to them for 5 years or at least 3 years after a corporate buyback. The idea is to align incentives for a longer arc rather than short term.
Senator Warren, this is Todd Harrison. Thank you for your service. I have a question. 93% of the constituency currently is in favor of legalizing medical marijuana across state lines. We know the state's bill is certainly probably the most progressive move so far. There's a lot of people suffering throughout this country who are depending on the federal government to finally move this and decriminalize this wonderful solution. Do you have any thoughts on the timing there?
So let me just explain it for everybody who's not deep in the heart of this. As you know, many states around the country have legalized marijuana either for medical reasons or for medical and for recreational reasons. The problem, of course, is that nothing has changed at federal law. There was something called the Cole Understanding during the Obama administration, where the Department of Justice said, we probably won't be prosecuting those laws, but now the current Attorney General has rolled that back. So what Cory Gardner, Republican from Colorado, and I have proposed is a bill that says, look, federal law can stay in place, but if a state has acted and the state has decided to legalize, then the federal government should just back off. Let the states do what the states want to do. Let them enforce their own laws. That would then fix the problem of anybody being subject to arrest for either purchasing or selling. It would also fix the problem in the banking system right now, that many people in the marijuana business, even in states where it's legal, can't actually get access to banking because the banks are afraid to take money that comes, according to the federal government, from illegal sources. And it would fix the tax problems, whether or not a marijuana business can actually deduct its business expenses, since again, according to the federal government, that's unlawful activity. We could fix that problem and yet let the states that are ready to move, move. The states that don't want to move don't have to move. I think that is a good compromise for everybody. So far, we've got Democrats and Republicans on board. We've been bringing them on in pairs to co-sponsor. What we need is a vote on the floor of the Senate. And so far, Mitch McConnell hasn't given us that. But if he would give us that vote, I actually feel pretty confident that we could get this thing passed.
Senator Warren, it's so great to talk to you. I know you say that you are running for senator right now. You're not talking about 2020. I'm just curious, after you're done running for senator, do you have any timeline for what we could think about for when we'd hear a decision for 2020?
All I'm thinking about right now is November 6th. That's 77 days away. I have just finished my 34th town hall. I have been all across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It has been so much fun to be out with people, to hear from them, and to talk about there's effectively an optimism out there, an optimism that we can make government work. Yeah, it's hard. Yes, people are stretched. Yes, people are worried. That's what this corruption bill is about. It's about saying to all those folks back in Massachusetts and all across this country, we get together, we can take our government back so that it no longer works just for the wealthy and the well-connected, so it really works for all of us.
All right, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, thank you so much for joining us live from Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too.